Hello and welcome. This is Lino Tadros, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a widget in the .NET Core front end of Sitefinity that has an image, so that you can automatically use image selectors, and also in the view you can have access to your images as well. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. The first thing I'm going to do, let me go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. I already created this project. I'm going to be putting the link of how I created this .NET Core project in the description for the video. So if you are not familiar how to create .NET Core front ends for Sitefinity 14.3 and above, you can actually follow that video first. But this is what usually you get. Right now we don't have any widgets. They will usually go under View Components. It's completely empty. So you can open up the terminal by saying terminal, new terminal right there. And make sure you are in the folder where the .NET Core front end is at. I actually created everything under a folder called SF New Site. And the way you actually create a widget pretty much as a view component for .NET Core is to use the .NET CLI by saying .NET. We'll say we would like to create a new of what? Well, there's going to be a Sitefinity widget. So we'll say Sitefinity dash widget. Alrighty. Widget, there you go. And also I will need to go ahead and give it a name. So we'll say dash dash, and we'll say widget name, widget dash name, and then between double quotes in here I'll give it whatever name I want. In my case, let's call it, for instance, something like image core prop. Okay, let me remove that extra R there. We'll close the double quotes and we'll push enter. Oh, look at that. I'm actually misspelled .NET. Alrighty, let's go back in here and remove that E, and we'll go ahead and push enter again. All right, so now a few files will be created for me. Alrighty, so if I open up View Components right now, you'll notice there is a new folder called Image Core Prop, and inside of there, I have my Image Core Prop View Components. If I click on it, you will notice in here we have the new class, the public class inheriting from View Component. We'll have the attribute for Sitefinity widget that will register our new widget. And it's automatically using invoke. You can change that to invoke async if you'd like to do that asynchronously. That's not a problem. And remember that the view is being returned by passing the context entity itself. Where is that entity? You'll notice it created in the same file. Some people like to create it in the same file like the CLI does. Sometimes you want to actually remove that class and put it in the entities folder. It's definitely up to you. Some people like it in the same file. Some people like it in different entities. Sitefinity will work either way. And again, it creates a hello world kind of property for you just to test things out. I'm not going to need that really, so I'm going to remove the string and the message. What I really want to do is to create an image property. And I want to find out if there is something in Sitefinity that will allow me to create that by just defining the public property, and also maybe have an attribute to tell me what designer do I want to use at design time to be able to allow me to select without writing all the code that will invoke all the stuff. And the good news is it is available in something called MixedContentContext. Alrighty, and then I can give it whatever name. It can be photos, it can be images, it can be whatever you want it to be. And again, there is a red line underneath there. You can actually go to the yellow in here, and you can say maybe usually there is one that will actually include it, but let me go ahead all the way to the top, and it's a namespace called using progress Sitefinity render entities.content. And now when you got back in here, there will be no red line. It understands exactly what that is. The only thing left for me to do now is to have the attribute to tell the system what selector do I want to do. So I'm going to tell it content like that. And in here, oh, it's not a content container. It's just a content like that. Alrighty, and the content, by the way, it's available in a different namespace. It has to do with the designer. So I'm going to go again all the way to the top and bring in the namespace correctly. That it is. It's progress Sitefinity render designers at attribute, and now content hopefully will be ready for us. There are multiple things that you can pass in here. The most important one is the type. That's the type of the designer that you'd like to associate with. So I'm going to say type, equal, and we'll say known content types. And then if you put a dot in here, you will see all the different designers that you can use. One for blog posts, blogs, calendars, categories, events, lists, images, tags, taxonomies, videos. There is tons of them. For this video here, we're going to deal with images. And that's pretty much it. Right now, I can compile this, believe it or not, and we will have at design time a way for us to associate an image using a selector built into Sitefinity for that specific property in here. There is more that you can actually pass in here, by the way. So right here after the images, I can put a comma. And there are things, for instance, like the default in Sitefinity to allow you to upload multiple images for the same exact record. And sometimes that's not what you want to do. Maybe you just want to allow only one image. So we can actually say allow multiple image item selection. There you go. It's called allow multiple item selection. And instead of saying to true, which you don't need to do that because that will be the default actually, I'm going to say false. And by doing that, you're telling the system I'm only going to allow one image per property, not multiple, which is the default. Does that make sense? Okay, now we need to move to the fun part. The fun part is in the views. If I go views, open up components, you will see a new folder called image core property, and that is my default.cshtml for the Razor syntax. Of course, I don't have a message in here, so I'm going to remove that. Hopefully model will be something else, alrighty? But for right now, notice I'm using the image core prop, so it does have access to the view component itself, and I'm bringing in the model from the entity. That means at this point, because I'm including that model in here, I'm importing it, it does have access to the image property that is of type MixedContentContext, alrighty? So that means there is a couple of more things I need to do. First of all, the old days in the MVC where I could actually write some code in the controller, for instance, to say, hey, let me create a library manager, get an instance of the library manager, and then get the image and parse its GUID. Well, unfortunately, you don't have access to the library manager right now because you're not inside of the CMS. You're in a completely different application. So the only thing it can do is to make calls using REST APIs, OData, for instance, to be able to get that. So I don't have direct access to the library manager. There is another video that I created in the library show you how to do that if you're doing this in the MVC widget, not in the .NET Core. That means sometimes in here, I will have to write maybe a couple of lines of code that will know how to go get me the type of the image from Sitefinity itself and make it available outside of Sitefinity. Very important to understand that. So there are two different namespaces that I would like to pay attention to. So I'm going to go right underneath this one, and I'm going to be bringing in these two. First of all, I'm going to bring in Progress Sitefinity RestSDK, and then the data to object libraries for that. What do these two guys bring to us? First of all, this one will allow you to have access to all the code that Sitefinity have wrapped for you to be able to make REST APIs versus the CMS to encapsulate a specific entity. So in this DTO in here, for instance, there will be an object representation for news, for blog posts, for images, for videos, for whatever. Instead of having to create your own class and add all the properties and redo all that work, we can actually use these DTOs that will bring in everything automatically for me. There is still one more thing that is needed for me to be able to do this. And what's needed in here to bring in the API for the REST API client itself. Again, instead of me doing all that work, I need something that knows how to do the CRUD operation. And what I mean by CRUD operation is to be able to create a new image, update an existing image, delete an image, or whatever DTO you're going to use, whether it's news, blogs, anything, alrighty? You'll have to know that. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you still have to come in here and you need to inject in your CS HTML in here, the REST client itself. So I'm going to say add inject, there you go. And in here, I'm going to say IRestClient, and we'll give it a name. We'll call it RestClient. That's good enough. You can call it whatever you want. But from that point on, by injecting the REST client, I do have access to an object that will allow me to do all the CRUD operations on that. Make sense? All right, so what is left for me? Well, before I get into the HTML to represent the image itself, I need a couple of lines of code that will take care of what being sent to me. The first of all, the way to write code in Razor syntax, say open up a bracket. Let me delete these from here. All right, so the code will go between these brackets in here with the @ for the razor syntax. So I'm going to come in here, and I've only promised you to write 2 lines of code. The first one, I need the GUID. I need the ID of the image that you chose from the designer. So I'm going to come in here, we'll say model dot, and in here, hopefully images will show up. This will be the name that you chose in your entity inside of the view component code, okay? And there is my images in there. And now I'll need to find out which one did you choose. So I'm going to say dot, and hopefully we will get a lot of different properties and functions. The one I'm interested in is item IDs ordered. There you go. And there might be multiple. Remember, the default in Sitefinity is to return multiple images. So I'm going to actually let it finish it up in here saying first or default. So it will just get us the first image in the items IDs ordered collection or lists inside of there. So the good news is whatever image you chose that has a GUID in the database, and this line of code will get me that GUID, okay? The next item will be, for instance, creating another variable. We'll call it, for instance, image. That's good enough for me. Or I can actually make it DTO so that I can remember that this is the data representation for the object itself. And I can do an await in here because I'm going to make a REST API call. See that REST client in here right there that I injected. I'm going to come in here and we'll say REST API dot, and we'll say get item. And the get item, this is again a function available through the REST client. So remember, the REST client will have something like create item, update item, get items with an S to get you the whole images, or just get item. But if you do a get item, you have to pass the ID, which is a good news because I have the ID already. So let's come in here and we'll tell it the type generic in here is going to be image DTO. That is the one coming in from the RestSDK DTO in here. And then we will finish it up by saying ID. You notice I'm getting a lot of help from the Copilot from GitHub. It reads a lot of my code and it's actually trying to figure it out what exactly needs to be passed. So again, if you don't have Copilot, you can actually still finish this code up with no problem. Does that make sense? So these are the 2 magical lines. One to get you the ID from whatever image that you chose. And the second one is to use the REST client that you injected to go get the item based on its ID and pretty much cast it as an image DTO. If I already have this image DTO, that's the entire object that represents this ID in the database. That means I can come in here instead of doing, for instance, an H1, maybe I can do it as an image. We'll say img source equals, and inside of here I will say something like guess what this will be? Image DTO, right? Dot, and hopefully we will find something that will get us the URL for this guy. So let's see, there is this is good enough for me, image URL in here. If you were using the MVC, this is use media URL. But if you're using the REST client to make the OData call, it's called URL. So again, these are the things that you sometimes have to know how to work between the two, whether you're inside of Sitefinity or making a call from the outside. Let's also go ahead and set up the width and height as well so that we don't get it too big. We'll say 200 pixels, and the height will also be 200 pixels. All right, that's good enough for me. Let's save this guy, and I'm going to save also the code in here, Control S, and I would like to go ahead and run it and see if this will work. So I'm going to come down in here, we'll say .NET run. And hopefully that will compile correctly. We will not have any problems. And then it will run it on localhost 5000 or localhost 5001 if you're running on HTTPS. There it is, it's running. Let me go ahead and bring it into this screen in here. There we go. All right, I am now running the front end in .NET Core, and I could be running this on Linux or Macs or Windows, whatever I would like. So I'm going to say /Sitefinity, and we'll go to the back end. I'm going to log in. Yes, please log me out of the CMS and log me back in the .NET Core front end. And here in a few seconds, the system will run. So now let me go to pages. And I'd like to create a .NET Core one right now. These are MVC ones that will not actually be able to show you the view components. So I'm going to come in here, we'll say create a new page, for instance, and I'm going to say my core page, for instance, and we'll say continue there. And there they are. These are the .NET Core templates that will only show if you're running underneath the .NET Core. Okay, these will not show up if you're running under the CMS, regular CMS. And there is the new designer. I'm going to say add a section in here. We'll click a section and we'll say we'd like to add a widget. And notice my image core prop shows up automatically. It got registered for me automatically. That's great. Let me go ahead and click on this guy. Oops, what happened? Value cannot be null. That means that I made a mistake, which is what happens if the image that you're trying to display in here does not exist. My code has no exception handling whatsoever. So I need to go fix that, otherwise it will never work. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go ahead back to the code in here, and we'll go to the default. See this line in here? It says images.itemsorder.first.default. Well, this would cause a crash. So there should be a better exception handling in here to make sure that the images is not null. And if it's null, I don't need to do any of that stuff. Otherwise, I will cause a crash. But I'm going to cheat a little bit for right now. I'm going to actually go in here. Even though this is causing you an error, go ahead and click on the editor. We'll click on this guy, we'll say edit. That will bring up the designer for the component. And we crash because there are no images yet. So I'm going to say plus in here. And let's go ahead and see if there is any images in the library. There you go, the Lino TV. Let's say use selected and save. And once I save, now the image is not empty, so it will not crash anymore. So again, I'm going to leave that for you as an exercise to add a couple of lines of code to do on a try catch, for instance, to make sure that the images, if it's null, we do not want to actually have access to the images, otherwise it will blow up. If you have something in here, then of course the code will work. But again, I will leave that as an exercise for you. All right, so that is my image showing up in here. So I can show you that the designer is working. So I can actually click here on the designer. This is the part that will show up just by having that one liner in the entity that says mixed content context images. That automatically shows up because I said the known type is of type images. So the image selector, I can click on the edit, change it. Notice there is no plus sign in here, okay? Very important to understand that piece as well. There is no plus sign in here, folks, because I said as part of the attribute for content, I said allow only, do not allow multiple selections. So this is false. That means you can only have one image. If I did not pass that, there would be a plus sign in here as well that I can add more images that would be associated with that one property. Does that make sense? All right. And also, other than that, we also created the view, and the view had 2 lines of code to get you the GUID from the database, and also use that GUID to get the item for the entire object of the image. And then finally, we displayed the image source pointing to the URL of that image, and it worked just fine. Hopefully this was useful to you to let you know how to deal with that. I will make other videos to show you the same technique for news and blogs, events and so on, but a lot of people ask for the one for images and videos, and this is the way to get it. All right, looking forward to the next video pretty soon. Thank you.